The milk had gone lukewarm by the time Malus reached the north stair, and she pressed the clay jug closer to her chest to save what warmth was left in it. She should not have been in this wing at all. Megas of the scullery kept to the kitchens and the wash yards and the long cold servants' halls beneath the hold, and they did not climb the north stair after the last bell, and they most certainly did not carry stolen milk to the door of the royal wards. If a houseguard found her here, she would lose her place, and losing her place in the pack of mist fell in the dead middle of a moon. Winter meant losing everything: the roof and the bread and the single blanket that was hers. She knew all of that. She climbed anyway. The hold lay silent around her. The great moonlit hold of mist fell, wrapped in the deep hush that came only in the small hours, when even the sentries drowsed at their posts and the fires had burned down to sullen red eyes in the hearths. Frost had crept in along the window ledges, though it was not yet the depth of the year, a thin gray rime that had no business creeping into a warm and living hold. The old ones muttered that the cold this season was a wrong cold. Malus did not let herself think about what they meant. She thought only about the three small ones at the top of the stair, who had cried themselves quiet again, as they did every night, and who would not sleep unless someone came. No one came, so she came. The door to the ward was warped and it stuck, and she nudged it with her hip until it gave. Inside, the one candle she had left burning, 3 nights running, still guttered in its dish, and by its little light she saw them. 3 pups, curled together in the one bed they had dragged their pallets into for warmth, the way orphaned things always found each other in the dark. They were the last of a border village the enemy had burned in the autumn. Everyone in the hold knew the story and no one in the hold spoke of it, because to speak of the raid was to speak of the war that hung over them all like a blade on a fraying thread. The pups had been carried in half-frozen, 3 of them and a 4th, who had not lived out the first week, and they had been given this cold, high room and a name on a list and nothing else that Malus could see. Nobody had been assigned to them. They were grief the whole did not have time for. The eldest lifted his head first. Pell was 7 years old and had decided some time ago that he was a grown wolf and afraid of nothing, and so he glared at her, the way he glared at everyone, chin up, eyes narrow, daring her to prove herself another cruelty. "It is only me," Malus whispered. "I brought you something warm." "We do not need anything," Pell said. His voice cracked in the middle of it. Beside him, the middle one, Evo, said nothing at all but watched the jug with the naked hunger of a child who had learned that food was a thing that came and then stopped coming. And the smallest sat up. Bryn was 4, or near it, nobody was sure, and Bryn had not spoken one word since the night she had been carried through the gates. She sat up now in the tangle of blankets, with her thin hair standing every way and her thumb in her mouth, and she looked at Malus, with enormous solemn eyes. And Malus felt the thing she felt every night, the thing that had made her start climbing this stair in the first place. It was not pity. Pity was a clean feeling, and this was not clean. This was recognition. She had been small and cold and unwanted once too, and she knew exactly, precisely, in her bones, how it felt to lie awake in the dark waiting for someone who was never going to come. So she had come. She knelt by the bed and poured a little of the milk into the wooden cup and held it out. And after a long, suspicious moment, Pell took it, because for all his glaring, he was 7 and he was hungry, and he drank and then passed it to Ivo without being told. Which told Malus more about the boy than anything he could have said. She filled it again. Ivo drank. She filled it a 3rd time, and offered it to the littlest, and Bryn did not take the cup, but leaned in and drank from it, while Malus held it, both small hands wrapped around Malus's one hand, and when the milk was gone, Bryn did not let go. She stayed there, holding Malus's hand, and then very slowly she tipped forward until her forehead rested against Malus's collarbone, and she breathed, and within the space of 100 heartbeats she was asleep. fully, heavily, trustingly asleep, the way only a small child can fall who has decided, without a single word, that this one lap in all the wide, cold world is safe. Melis did not move. She barely breathed. Something warm and enormous ached open behind her ribs, some old shut door swinging wide, and she thought, foolishly, helplessly, that she would climb that stair every night for the rest of her life if it meant this. If it meant that one small, unwanted thing could fall asleep unafraid. "You should not do this," Pell said quietly, from the dark. He had lain back down and pulled the blanket to his chin, and he was watching her with those wary eyes, but the glare had gone out of them. "When they find out, they will send you away. Everyone who is kind to us gets sent away." "Then I will be careful not to be found out," Melis said. "You always say that," Pell muttered, and he closed his eyes, and he did not tell her to leave. She stayed until the candle was a puddle. She stayed while the frost thickened on the window, and the wrong hold pressed its face to the glass. She was easing Bryn back down into the blankets, moving with the exaggerated care of someone handling something breakable, when she felt it. A change in the air of the room, a weight. The particular animal awareness, older than thought, that tells you that you are no longer the only creature in a space. She turned her head. He was standing in the doorway. She knew him at once. Of course she did. And everyone in Mistfell knew him, though she had never in her life stood within 10 paces of him. The Alpha King filled the low doorframe and had to bow his dark head slightly to see into the room, and the banked candlelight caught the hard planes of his face and the black hair and the eyes, those pale eyes, fixed on her with an expression she could not read at all. He was not supposed to be here any more than she was. Kings did not walk their own holds at the dead middle of the night. Kings did not come to the cold, high room where the pack kept its grief. Melis's heart slammed once, hard, and then seemed to stop entirely. She was an omega of the scullery, caught with stolen milk in the royal ward, with a sleeping orphaned pup in her arms, and the most powerful wolf in the hold was looking at her, and she waited for the anger, for the guards, for the ruin she had always known would come. It did not come. He stepped into the room, and, as he passed under the candle, she saw for just a moment, at the strong line of his throat, above the collar of his coat, a thin band of something that was not skin and not shadow. A line of silver, dull and cold, circling his neck like the ghost of a chain. She did not know what it was. She only knew that when the light touched it, the wrong cold in the room seemed to deepen, and that the king's pale eyes, when they left her face and settled on the sleeping children, held something so much like grief that she forgot, for one whole breath, to be afraid. Then he spoke, low, so as not to wake them. "Do you come every night?" And Melis, who had every reason in the world to lie, heard herself tell him the truth. She had expected to be dismissed by morning. Instead, the king came back the next night, and the night after that. Melis never knew when he would appear. She would be halfway through the milk, or telling Evo the one story she knew by heart, or coaxing Bryn's fingers loose from her sleeve, and she would feel that shift in the air and turn, and he would simply be there in the doorway, saying nothing, a great dark stillness at the edge of the little warm circle her candle threw. The first few times she scrambled to her feet, and bowed and stammered, and he watched her do it with something tired in his face, and on the 4th night he said, "Sit. You will frighten the small one," and she sat, and after that, she stopped rising. He did not do much. That was the strange thing she could not fit into any shape she understood. He did not command. He did not question her. He did not tell her to stop coming. He came and he lowered himself onto the hard bench against the wall, this king who had thrones enough, and he watched 3 orphaned pups drink warm milk in a cold room, and something in his shoulders would come down by a hand's breadth, as though the watching eased a weight he carried everywhere else. It was Bryn who broke first, as Bryn had broken first for Melis. On the 7th or 8th night, the littlest one, milk finished, looked past Melis to the silent man on the bench, and then she got up on her unsteady legs and crossed the whole terrifying distance of the floor, and stood in front of the Alpha King and lifted both arms. Malus stopped breathing. For a moment, the king did not move at all, and his face did a thing she would remember for a long time afterward, a kind of flinch, as though the small raised arms had struck him somewhere no blade ever had. Then he bent, and with hands that could have broken a grown wolf's spine, he gathered the child up, with a care so exact it hurt to watch, and he settled her against his chest. And Bryn put her thumb in her mouth and her head under his jaw, and closed her eyes. "She does not speak," Malus said softly, because it seemed he ought to know, "not since they brought her in. The healers say there is nothing wrong with her throat." "There is nothing wrong with her throat," the king agreed, very low, looking down at the small sleeping weight against him. "There is a great deal wrong with the world that took her voice. That is a different thing, and no healer mends it." He was quiet a moment. "I know something of what it is to have your voice taken." She did not understand the words then. She only heard the weariness under them, and the way his hand had come up to cradle the back of the child's head. And she thought, this is not the king the Hold talks about. The Hold talked about a hard young king, a cold one, a wolf who had frozen over the winter. His father died and never thawed, who sat in council like a carved thing, and let the terrible speaker of House Riven do half his talking for him. That king was made of iron and bad weather. This one was holding a sleeping child, as though she were the only warm thing left in the year. "Why do you come?" she asked him, before she could think better of it. He was a long time answering. "Because it is the one room in this hold," he said at last, "where I am not required to be the king, and because these three are here, because I failed to reach their village in time." His jaw tightened. "I keep what I could not save. I do not expect you to think well of me for it. I think," Malus said carefully, "that a man is not the sum of the things he could not do. He is also the stair he climbs at the dead middle of the night when no one is watching, and there is nothing to be gained." The king looked at her, then really looked, the way he had that first night, and the pale eyes were not cold at all. And Malus felt her face go hot, and dropped her gaze to the jug in her lap. The nights went on. The moon winter deepened outside, the wrong cold biting harder, and more than once she saw him rub at the thin silver line beneath his collar as though it pained him. Once when Evo grew bold and asked him a plain question about the war on the border, she watched his mouth open to answer, and then close, watched a spasm cross his face, watched him go rigid and pale and say nothing at all, as though the words had struck some barrier in his own throat and stopped. The moment passed, he turned it aside with a small, dry joke about bold questions and bold boys, and Ivo laughed. And Malus almost let herself forget it. Almost. Because on the last night, before everything broke, after the pups had gone down and the candle had burned low, the Alpha King sat with the sleeping Bryn in the crook of his arm, and he looked across the little warm room at Malus, and he said, in a voice that had nothing kingly in it at all, "If I could choose, if it were ever, in this life, given to me to choose freely, I would want you to know that I would choose." And then he stopped. His whole body went taut. His hand rose to his throat. And in the dying candlelight, Malus saw the thin band of silver at his neck flare with a cold, pale light. And the King of Mistfell shut his mouth on whatever he had been about to say, and the words she had leaned her whole heart forward to catch never came. They came for her at dawn, and they did not knock. 2 house guards in the grey of House Riven filled the door of the scullery where Malus slept among the other Omegas, and one of them said her name as a fact and not a question, and the other took her by the arm hard enough to bruise. And she was walking down the long cold hall between them before she was properly awake, her heart going like a trapped bird. The other Omegas watched from their pallets, with wide, frightened eyes, and not one of them moved, because you did not move when the Grey Guards came. You were only grateful they had not come for you. They took her up. Not down to the dungeons, which was what her terror had assumed, but up into the wide, bright, cruel heart of the hold. Through doors she had never been permitted to pass, until they brought her out into the great council hall of Mistfell, and there her steps faltered, because the hall was full. The whole court had assembled. Pack lords in their furs, warriors along the walls, the high and the mighty of Mistfell ranked on the tiers of stone, and every face turned to look at the Omega in her patched gray dress being marched up the center of the floor like a criminal. At the far end, on the raised seat, sat the Alpha King, and he did not look at her. That was the first wrongness. He sat with his hands on the arms of the great chair, and his face as still and shut as the stone of the walls, and his pale eyes stared at the middle distance over her head, and though she was brought to a halt not 15 paces from him, he did not once let his gaze fall to her face. Beside his seat stood a woman, Malus knew by sight and by dread. Lady Sereth of House Riven the Speaker, tall and silver-haired and beautiful in the way that a knife is beautiful, robed in the pale gray of her house, a chain of silver discs about her throat, and on the king's other side, one hand resting with cool ownership on the back of his chair, stood a younger woman with the same silver hair and the same winter eyes, Cressa of House Riven. Even Malus, who knew nothing of the court, knew that face. Everyone in Mistfell knew that the speaker had spent a year positioning her daughter at the king's side. "This is the creature," Lady Sereth said. Her voice was low and carrying, and it filled the hall without effort. "This is the scullery Omega who has been climbing to the royal ward each night, who has laid hands, unbidden, upon the last children of the burned march, who has, night after night, drawn our king from his own rooms in the dark hours to a servant's tryst dressed up as charity." A murmur went through the hall, ugly, delighted. Malus's face burned. "I only brought them milk," she said, and her voice came out small in that vast cold room. They were alone. No one else came. "She confesses it freely," Sereth said, as though Malus had admitted to murder. "She does not even know her place well enough to lie." The speaker turned toward the throne, and her voice gentled into something worse than cruelty, something like tender reason. "My king, the court has indulged this, but the pack cannot. You know what stands at our border. You know what the wolves of Drossmark will do to what remains of the march, to those very children, if the alliance is not sealed, and sealed now. The moon does not wait. The cold does not wait. You know what must be spoken today, and by whom, and you know the price of leaving it unspoken." And she looked at the king. "Price!" And Malus, watching, saw the thin silver line at his throat catch the light above his collar, and she saw Sereth's own moon-silver chain answer it with a faint cold gleam. And she understood in a rush of ice that these two things were the same thing, that she had seen that same silver flare in a dark ward the night before, and that the word he had tried to give her had been strangled in his throat by it. "Speak your choice, my king," Sereth said softly. "Name your Luna." The king rose. He rose the way a man rises under a great weight, and he crossed to stand before the assembled pack, and when he turned, Malus saw his face full on at last, and it was terrible, not cold, never cold, but locked, straining, a man drowning behind glass. His mouth opened. For one wild instant, his eyes found hers, and everything he could not say was in them, a whole doomed ocean of it, and she saw him fight, saw the cords stand out in his neck, saw him try with his entire being to turn toward the ragged Omega in the middle of the floor, and say her name. The silver at his throat blazed white and cold. "I take Cressa of House Riven," the Alpha King said, in a voice like something breaking. As Luna of Mistfell, the hall erupted. And over the roar of it, no one but Malus saw the king's hand close so hard on the hilt of his own belt knife that his knuckles went white, and no one but Malus felt the thing that happened then, high and secret and unbearable, the small warm place over her own heart, where a mark she had told no living soul about. And a mark he had pressed there in the dark of the forest, one stolen summer night, and sworn was a promise, did not go cold as a cast-off promise should. It flared, against all law and all sense, warm. She knew The moment the guards released her arm in the disordered crush of the celebrating hall, that if she lay down one more night under that roof, she would not live to see another dawn. And so she used the only thing an Omega ever truly owned, the gift of being no one worth watching. And she walked out of the great hall while the court roared its approval of its new Luna, and no eye followed her. She had almost nothing to gather, a second dress, a comb. The little pouch of dried herbs she kept against the sickness that woke her every morning now. The sickness she had told no one about, because the moment she understood what it meant, she had also understood that it changed everything, and that she must guard it with her life. Her hand pressed flat to her belly in the dark of the empty scullery, and the truth she had carried for 3 weeks pressed back. She had gone to the ward each night to mother the children of strangers. And all the while she had been carrying one of her own, his. The word rose in her, and she shoved it down, because it was a knife and she could not afford to bleed just now. There was one thing she could not leave without doing, and it was the thing that nearly broke her. She climbed the north stair once more, and she stood in the doorway of the cold high room and looked at the 3 sleeping shapes tangled together in the one bed, and she understood that she could not wake them. If she woke them, Bryn would take her hand and not let go, and she would not have the strength to pull free, and they would all be found. So she did the only kindness left to her. She set the last of the milk where they would find it, and she laid her own blanket, the single blanket that was hers, over the 3 of them, and she left the candle burning so that when they woke in the dark, they would not wake to nothing. "Be brave. A little longer," she whispered to Pell, who would have to be the grown wolf. Now, in truth, someone will come. She did not believe it, even as she said it. But she said it, because a lie told in love is sometimes the only blanket a child gets. Then she went down through the servants' ways she knew better than the palace knew itself, and she slipped the side gate, and the frozen dark of the moon winter took her in. She walked until the hold was a smear of light behind her, and then a memory, and then nothing. The cold was a living thing that year. It reached into the seams of her cloak and found the warmth and drank it, and still she walked, because to stop was to freeze, and to freeze was to be found in the spring thaw and known. And as she walked, in the ruin of everything, the small warm place over her heart, the mark she had never told a soul about, gave a single deep pulse, not her feeling. A wave of anguish so vast and so unmistakably not her own, that she stopped in the road and pressed her hand to her chest and gasped aloud in the empty white dark. A cast-off promise went cold, everyone knew that. A wolf who put a woman aside felt nothing through a mark that no longer bound him. And yet here in the frozen night she felt him grieving, as though something were being torn, living out of him, and for one wild moment, hope reared up so hard it hurt. She killed it. Hope was a warmth, and she had just learned tonight exactly how warmth could be used against her. Whatever she had felt, she told herself, walking on, she had imagined, he had chosen, she had seen him choose. She did not let herself wonder why a warmth she could feel was also a warmth that could be followed. She only knew that she was not running for one life now. She was running for 2. By the turning of the 3rd moon, the village of Milbeck had stopped asking where the quiet woman had come from. It had been an easy enough silence to buy. In a year, when the border burned and the roads filled with the ash-gray survivors of villages that were no longer on any map, one more soft-spoken woman, with grief in her face and nothing on her back, drew no second look. She said she had come from the march, from a hamlet the raiders had taken, and it was near enough to true that she never once stumbled over it. The people of Milbeck, a hard, poor mountain village that clung to its terraces above a frozen beck, took her in the way such places take in a useful pair of hands, without warmth and without cruelty. And they gave her the lean stone room behind the meeting hall, and they waited to see what she was good for. What she was good for, it turned out, was the one thing that winter, that no one else could do, for the wrong cold, had followed her out of the hold, or perhaps it had spread everywhere at once. She never knew. All across the high country, the hearths would not hold their heat. Fires laid and lit would sink to embers within the hour for no reason anyone could name, as though the cold were eating the flame from inside, and old ones died in their beds, of a chill that no amount of wood could beat back. But when Malus knelt at a failing hearth and laid her 2 hands to the cold stone, and simply, quietly, wanted the fire to live, it lived. It caught, and it held, and it burned, clean through the night, and the room grew warm, and the sick child in the corner stopped its thin coughing and slept. She did not understand it. She had felt the warmth in her all her life. A small banked private thing, she had been beaten for showing as a girl, and had learned to hide, and she had always thought it only made her odd. Now, in a killing winter, it made her necessary. She told no one what she did. She let them think she simply knew a trick with the drawing of a flue, and she went from cottage to cottage in the blue dusk, keeping the fires of Milbeck alive one by one, and her belly grew rounder under her cloak, and the village midwife, a shrewd old woman who missed nothing, looked at her one evening and said only, "You carry high. It will be a strong one," and asked her nothing else, for which Malus could have wept with gratitude. And every night, alone in her lean stone room, she pressed her hand to the mark over her heart that would not go cold. That was the thing she could not explain to herself, the splinter she could not work out of the wound. She had waited for it to fade. Rejection severed a bond, everyone knew that. The mark of a wolf who had put you aside crumbled to a pale scar within a moon, and troubled you no more. Hers had not faded. It stayed warm as a banked coal against her heart, and on the coldest nights it ached, and always the ache pulled the same way, north and east, toward the hold, toward him, like a needle that would only ever point at one star. She lay awake and hated it, and could not stop pressing her hand to it, the way the tongue goes back and back to the broken tooth. Then the peddler came up from the low country with his mule and his news, and the news was all of one thing. The king of Mistfell, he told the meeting hall, had come undone. No one had laid eyes on the man in council for a moon or more. The great hold sat dark, its own hearths gone cold, its new Luna shut in her rooms, and its speaker ruling in the king's name. While the king himself, they said, rode the frozen roads at night, alone in his wolf, howling like a soul in torment, ranging through village after village in the dead dark, searching for a woman no one could name. Malice sat very still in the corner, with her mending in her lap, and did not lift her head. Searching for what? Someone asked the peddler. What woman? That is the mad part of it, the peddler said, warming his hands at Malice's fire without knowing whose it was. A man puts a woman aside before his whole court, takes another to Luna, and then loses his mind hunting the one he threw away. Makes no sense, unless he did not finish. But Malus finished it for him, silently, in the roaring quiet of her own skull, unless he never threw her away at all. And in that instant, as if the thought itself had reached out across the frozen leagues and touched him, the mark over her heart flared hot, not the low ache she had carried for 3 moons. Hot, sudden, a brand pressed to living skin, so fierce that her breath caught and her needle slipped and bit her thumb, and she stared down at the bead of blood welling dark against her cold skin, and knew, with a certainty that stopped her heart, exactly what that heat meant. It meant he was close. She was still sitting frozen over her bleeding thumb when the knock came at the meeting hall door. And it was not a villager's knock. The room stilled. Milbeck knew every knock that belonged to it, and this was none of them. This was 3 slow, heavy blows from a fist used to being answered. And the elder, who rose to lift the bar, did it slowly, the way a man moves who suspects the thing on the other side of the door is going to change his life. When the door swung in, the cold came first, and then the man. He was old for a warrior, and built like the mountain itself, gray in his beard and grizzled at the temples. and he wore no colors that Malus could see, which somehow frightened her more than the gray of Riven would have. His eyes went once around the room, unhurried, weighing every face, and they passed over the village folk as though they were furniture. And they stopped on the woman in the corner with the needle in her hand, and they stayed. "Walk with me," he said to her. "Not to the room, to her. I have come a long and cold way to say a thing to you, and I will say it once, and then you may do as you like with it." She should have refused. Every instinct she had learned in a life of being small told her to shrink, to deny her own name, to be no one. But she was so tired of being no one, and the mark over her heart was still burning, and so she set down her mending and rose, and drew her cloak about her belly, and walked out into the frozen dark beside a stranger. Twice her size and the village watched her go, and did not dare to stop it. Outside, under a sky scoured with hard stars, he did not waste words. "My name is Osmond," he said. "I have served the Alpha King of Mistfell since before he could stand, and his father before him. I know what you are to him, though he has never spoken your name to me, for he cannot. That is the first thing you must understand. He cannot speak your name. He has not been able to since the night before he stood in that hall and put another woman in the place that was yours." Malus's throat closed. "He chose," she managed. "I was there. I watched him choose her." "You watched him lose," Osmond said, and there was an old grief in it. "Listen to me, and do not run until I have finished, for what I am about to tell you is worth your life. The Speaker of House Riven is no mere counselor. She is an oath speaker, the last of the old moon-bound line, and the words she speaks over a wolf take hold in his blood, and do not let go. She came to the king in the autumn, after the march was burned, when the survivors of a dozen villages huddled in his hold, and the wolves of Drossmark massed at the border scenting weakness. And she made him an offer that was a trap dressed as a mercy. "Swear the moon oath," she told him. "Take my daughter to Luna, and seal the alliance, and Drossmark holds its hand, and the children live. Refuse, and I speak nothing, and the border falls, and every survivor you carried in on your own back dies in the spring." The cold went all the way through Malus, then colder than the winter. "The children," she whispered, "Pel Evo, Bryn, those three, and every other soul he failed to save the first time," Osmond said. "He would have gone to his own death gladly. He could not send theirs, so he swore." And the oath she laid on him did more than bind his hand in marriage. It sealed his very voice against the truth, so that he could not warn you, could not explain, could not so much as say your name aloud, on pain of the oath tearing the life out of him where he stood. That silver you have seen at his throat is the oath made visible. He has worn it like a slave's collar since the night he chose the children over his own heart, and it has been killing him by inches ever since, because a mate bond denied does not fade, it rots. And a rotting bond in a wolf as strong as that one is pulling the whole of Mistfell down into the cold with him, the hearts that will not hold, the winter that will not break. That is his grief, made weather. Malus stood with both hands pressed to her belly and the tears freezing on her face, and every wall she had built in 3 moons of exile came down at once. "Then why are you here?" she said, "and not him?" "Because he does not know where you are, and I have not told him," Osmond said grimly. "The bond drags him closer every night, but he searches half mad and half blind, and if he reaches you before the rest of this is done, he will die reaching. And there is worse." He drew something from his coat, a torn scrap of gray vellum, and even in starlight she could see the moon's silver seal broken upon it. "This came into my hands 3 days ago. The Speaker has learned you live. She has learned what you carry, and she means to see it ended before the binding is sealed at the dark of the moon, 4 nights from now, so that no true bloodline can ever rise to challenge her daughters. She has sent her own son to do it, a hunter named Roth. He left the hold before I did." "Then he is—" "Yes," Osmond said, and his head came up, and his nostrils flared, and his hand went to the long knife at his belt as, out beyond the frozen beck, the hard, bright starlight caught and moved on something coming fast across the snow. He is here. Let us pause here for just a breath. If this story has taken hold of you, and you do not want to miss the ones that come after it, subscribe to the channel before we go on. Now, back to the frozen dark, and the shape crossing the snow. Osmond moved before Malus understood what she was seeing. One moment the old warrior stood beside her, a man, and the next there was no man at all, but a great grizzled wolf between her and the dark, hackles up, a growl coming out of him like stones grinding, and beyond him, loping in low and fast and terrible over the crust of the snow, came the thing House Riven had sent to end her. Roth and his wolf was lean and pale and wrong, a killer bred and trained, and he did not slow, and he did not circle. He struck. The two wolves came together with a sound Malice felt in her teeth, a snarling, crashing tangle of muscle and snow, and she saw at once that Osmond, for all his size, was old, and that the pale wolf was fast in a way that youth and cruelty make a creature fast. They broke apart and closed again, and the second time the pale wolf came away with the better of it, and it was Osmond who staggered, a long hurt torn down his flank that buckled his leg beneath him. He was going to lose. She knew it, the way she knew the pull of the mark. Bone deep, certain. The old wolf had put himself between her and death, and he was going to die of it, here in the snow, and then the pale thing would come for her and the child, and there was no one else. There was only Malus. There had only ever been Malus, standing in a doorway. No one else would fill, and something in her, some banked and hidden and lifelong smothered thing, said, quietly, enough. She did not decide to do it. She only stopped holding it back. All her life, she had pressed the warmth down small, had hidden it, had been beaten as a girl for the day. A dead hearth roared to life under her hands, in front of the wrong eyes. She stopped pressing. She opened her two hands toward the killing dark, and she let the thing she was come up out of her at last, and it came up, not as light, but as heat, a great soundless rush of it, the deep gold heat of a forge throat thrown open, of a hearth in the heart of winter, of every fire she had ever coaxed back from the edge of death. The snow between her and the pale wolf hissed to water, and then to steam. And the wolf of House Riven, this cold thing bred to cold work, this creature whose whole strength was the wrong winter at his back, flinched from her warmth as from a brand. He yelped a high, shocked sound and threw himself backward, and where the heat had touched him, his pale fur was singed dark and smoking. Malus walked forward. She did not know she was doing it. The heat poured off her in waves that melted the crust to bare black earth beneath her feet, and the pale wolf gave ground before her, snarling, unable to close, unable to bear the warmth that was death to everything cold in him. She reached the fallen Osmond, and she knelt and laid one burning hand to the torn flank. And she wanted, fiercely, the way she wanted a dying fire to live, for the wound to close. And it closed. The torn flesh knit under her palm, and the old wolf shuddered and heaved himself up onto his feet, whole. Roth understood then that he could not take her. She saw the calculation go through even that vicious animal skull. He backed away, and then he turned and fled north and east into the dark toward the hold, toward his mother, carrying the one thing worse than her death, which was the news that she was not the helpless flaw they had believed, but something with fire in her hands. Malus sank down into the steaming snow, all at once emptied, shaking, the heat guttering out of her like a spent candle. Osmond shifted to his man's shape and caught her before she fell, and he was staring at her with a look she had no name for, part awe and part something older, part recognition. Hearth born, he breathed, by the moon. You're the last of the hearthline, and you never knew. She had no strength to ask him what he meant, because just then the mark over her heart, which had been burning warm all this while, went past warm, past hot, blazed suddenly into something that stole her breath entirely. And she lifted her head, and out across the white waste from the north and the east, hurtling toward her, faster than any horse, faster than any natural thing, black against the snow, and enormous, came the wolf she would have known in her sleep, in her grave, in any world there was. He had found her. He came off the last rise, not like a wolf running, but like a wave breaking, and he crossed the open ground between them in a handful of bounds, and then the great black wolf stood before her in the steaming snow, sides heaving, and Malus looked up into a pair of pale eyes she had last seen locked and drowning behind glass, and she could not move. For a long moment, neither of them did. The wolf, that was the king, stood over her close enough that she felt the furnace heat of him, and he lowered his vast head and pushed his muzzle, with a gentleness that was almost unbearable in a thing that size, against the swell of her belly beneath the cloak. He breathed her in, he breathed in the small new life she carried, and a sound came out of him, not a growl and not a howl, a low broken thing. Grief and wonder tangled past, separating. Then the shift took him, that shudder of the air, and where the wolf had been the man knelt in the snow before her, and the king of Mistfell was weeping without any shame at all. "You are alive," he said, and his voice was wrecked, scraped down to nothing by 3 moons of howling. "I could not find you. Every night I could not find you. I could feel you, and I could not. I was going out of myself, and you are alive, and you are." His eyes fell to her belly, and he could not finish. His hand came up and hovered, trembling, not quite daring to touch. This man who could have crushed stone, held frozen in the air a breath from her, asking with his whole ruined face the thing he could not make himself presume. Malus took his hand in both of hers and pressed it flat against the child. The child moved as if it knew, as if it had been waiting for exactly this hand, and Malus watched the king of Mistfell come apart entirely, his forehead dropping to rest against her, his shoulders shaking, his hand splayed wide over the life he had not known he had made. "I tried to tell you," he got out, "that last night. In the ward, I tried to say I would choose you, that I would always, and it took the words out of my throat before I could. And then I stood in that hall and it made me say her name while you watched, and I could not even turn my head to you. I could not. And you looked at me as though I had killed you, and I had, and I could do nothing." "I know," Malus whispered, her own tears falling into his dark hair. "Osmond told me. I know now, I know." But even as she said it, she felt him go rigid under her hands. He lifted his head, and the tears were still on his face, but a new thing had come into it, a warning, and she saw his hand go to his own throat, to the thin band of cold silver that still circled it. "Even here, even now." "It is not gone," she said, understanding. "Even now, even come all this way to me. It never sleeps," he said hoarsely. "I stole this every league toward you it fought me, and now that I am here it will make me pay." His jaw clenched. "But I am done being made a liar. Malus, look at me. Whatever it does to me, hear me say it. I take no oath before this one. I take no woman before you. You are my." The silver flared white. It was not like the ward, where it had only stolen a word. Here, with him trying to break it open by main force, to speak the claiming outright, it turned on him like a hound turning on its own master. He made a terrible strangled sound and folded forward into the snow, both hands at his throat, and the cold silver blazed and bit, and Malus saw his lips go gray, saw the breath lock in his chest, saw the oath quite simply beginning to kill the man for the crime of loving her out loud. "Stop," she cried, hauling at his shoulders. "Stop. Do not, Ravon. I command you to stop. Do not say it. Do not." He stopped. He had to. He knelt gasping in the snow, with the silver dimming slowly at his throat, alive, barely, and Malus held his shaking body against her and understood with total clarity that the man would die before he would leave the word unsaid a second time, and that the only way to keep him living was to take the thing off him at its root. She looked up over his bowed head to where Osmond stood grim in the ruined snow. "The speaker made it," she said. "Then the speaker can be made to unmake it. Or I will unmake her." She tightened her arms around the king. "We are going back to the hold." They sheltered that night in a shepherd's abandoned bothy on the high moor, a single stone room, with a hearth long cold, and the first thing Malus did, when they came in out of the killing wind, was kneel at that dead hearth and lay her hands to it and wake the fire. And the King of Mistvale watched her do it with an expression she was only beginning to learn to read. There was so much between them and so little of it could be spoken. He could not tell her, in words, the shape of what had been done to him. The oath still snapped its jaws whenever he came too near the truth of it. So he did the only thing left. He sat beside her at the fire she had made, and he drew back the collar of his coat, and he bared the thin cruel band of silver at his throat, and he took her hand and laid her fingers against it. And through the mark, through the warmth that bound them that had never once gone cold, she felt everything the oath forbade his tongue. She felt the autumn night the speaker came to him, with her mercy that was a trap, and the exact weight of the choice, the children's faces set against her own. She felt the moment he swore, and the silver closing round his throat like ice on a river, and the horror of waking the next dawn, already unable to say the one name that mattered. She felt the hall, from the inside this time, felt him screaming behind his own stone face, while his mouth made the words that broke her, felt him tear his own hand open on his knife, just to have some pain that was his to choose. She felt the 3 moons after, the nights in the wolf, on the frozen roads, the way the world had narrowed, to a single unbearable pull, he could not follow to its end. She felt, under all of it, steady as a banked coal, the thing the oath had never managed to touch, which was that he loved her, had loved her, since a stolen summer in a forest, before he was ever a king in truth, when a lonely young wolf and a hidden hearth-born girl had found in each other the one warm thing in either of their cold lives. And he had pressed a secret promise over her heart, and meant it with everything he was. When she took her hand from the silver, she was weeping. And so was he, and neither of them was ashamed. "You could not say it, Rovan," she said. "So I will say it, for both of us. And no oath in the world, made by any Riven, can stop my mouth." She took his face in her 2 warm hands. "I love you. I loved you when I thought you had thrown me away. I loved you through every cold night of running, carrying your child, hating you, and never once stopping. I know now what you gave to keep those children breathing, and I would not have you be a smaller man than the one who did it. I love you. There, it is said, it is out in the world, and it cannot be taken back." The king made a sound and pulled her into him, careful of the child even in his need, and held her as though she were the fire and he had been cold. His whole life, they did not sleep much. There was too little time and too much to plan, and the deeper they moved into the night, the more Malus understood the size of the thing they were walking back toward. But for a few hours, in a shepherd's bothy on the roof of the world, with the fire she had made throwing gold across his face, she let herself be simply held by the man who had never truly let her go. It was Osmond who broke it, near dawn, coming in stiff from the cold watch with his face like a closed door. "A rider found us," he said, "one of mine, half dead in the saddle. The speaker knows her son failed. She is not waiting for the dark moon any longer." He looked at the king, and then at Malus, and there was dread in it. "She has moved the ceiling to this very night. And she has locked the survivors away under guard, as surety, every soul the king ever carried out of the march, to be put out onto the winter roads to die the moment anyone lifts a hand against the binding. The children among them, all 3. They came down out of the mountains through a day the color of iron, and with every league the wrong cold deepened, and Malus, who could feel warmth the way other wolves felt scent, felt the whole of Mistfell dying by degrees around her as they neared its heart. She rode before the king, on his great black horse, wrapped in his warmth and her own, and where the road was empty and the wind was loud, he told her the things the oath allowed, the small human things, and she gave him hers. And somewhere in the grey miles, the last wall between them came quietly down. When he stopped the horse in the lee of a stand of dead pines to let it breathe, he looked down at her with those pale eyes, and she reached up and drew his mouth to hers, and the kiss was slow, and it was aching, and it was 3 moons, and 1 stolen summer, and a lifetime of cold in the coming to it. And the mark over her heart flared so bright and so warm that the snow melted off the pine boughs above them and fell around them like soft rain. "When this is done," he said against her lips, "and it will be done, I will speak the words the way they were meant to be spoken, before the whole pack in the light, with nothing on my throat but your mouth." When this is done, she agreed, and did not let herself doubt it, because doubt was a cold thing, and she had no more room for cold. They reached the ridge above the hold as the short day failed, and Melis looked down and her heart turned over. The great moonlit hold of Mistfell sat dark. Not the warm dark of a sleeping house, but the black dead dark of a place whose fires have gone out. Every window, a blind, cold eye, frost furring the very stones. Above the gate, where the king's own standard should have flown, hung the pale grey banner of House Riven with its moon-silver disk, and the yard within crawled with grey-clad guards, and over it all lay a silence that was somehow worse than any noise, the silence of a pack that has been made to kneel. "She has taken it whole," the king said, very low, and Melis felt the fury come off him like heat. "While I ran mad on the roads she took my hold, my people, my throne, and called my grief a madness to justify it. And tonight, she seals it forever." Osmond had gone ahead to gather what loyal wolves remained, and he came back through the blue dusk with perhaps 20 of them, warriors who had slipped their posts and hidden their colors and waited, half despairing for exactly this, for the king to come back to himself and come home. They knelt in the snow when they saw him, and there were tears on more than one hard face. And Melis understood that whatever Sereth had told the pack had never truly believed its king had run mad. It had only been waiting. "The survivors are held in the old granary hall," Osmond reported. "Under heavy guard, the speaker's surest men. She has been plain about it. The instant the binding is challenged, they go out the north gate onto the roads, the old, the sick, and the 3 little ones, out into a winter that kills a grown wolf in a night." His jaw worked. "She has built it so that to save your throne you must spend those children. She knows you. She knows you would rather lose the crown. She knows the man who swore her oath in the autumn," the king said. "She does not know what has come down out of the mountains with me tonight." And he looked at Melis, and so did every wolf in that ring. And Melis felt the weight of it settle on her, the thing she had run from her whole life, the being seen. "Then we do not let her choose the ground," Melis said. "She expects the king to come with fire and swords for his throne, and she has set the children against that, so the king does not come first." She drew a slow breath. "I do." The binding was held in the great council hall, in the same cold, cruel heart of the hold, where 3 moons before it had made the king say the wrong name, and the whole cowed court had been summoned to witness the sealing that would make the theft law. Melis walked into it alone. She came up the center of the floor as she had the first time, in a patched gray cloak, an omega that no one looked at twice, and by the time the gray guards, startled and moved to stop her, she was already halfway to the dais, and Lady Sereth of House Riven had already seen her and lifted one hand to hold her men still. Because Sereth was clever, and Sereth wanted to understand a thing before she killed it. "The fire-handed girl," the speaker said into the ringing silence. Beside her, Cressa had gone white, and behind the throne, arm-bound and face-scarred, with a burn that would never heal, stood Roth, staring at Melis with hatred and under it fear. "My son told me a pretty story of the moor. I did not quite believe him. And yet here you are, walking into the one place in the world where I am strongest, carrying the one thing I mean to destroy. She smiled, and it was worse than any snarl. You have saved me the trouble of the roads. I have come for the children, Malus said. Her voice did not shake, she was astonished, distantly, that it did not shake. Whatever you do to me, you will let them go. They are nothing to your binding. They were only ever your knife against a good man's throat. They are everything to my binding, Sereth said. They are the reason the king knelt to me in the autumn, and they are the reason he will kneel again tonight, when he comes howling in to save you, and finds that every life he treasures is the price of every blow he strikes. She raised her hand, and at the edges of the hall, Malus saw the guards tighten on the doors of the granary hall beyond. You have brought him, of course. You always were the bait girl, from the first night you carried your milk up that stair. Did you never wonder why the door to the royal ward was left unlocked for a scullery drab? I left it open. I set you in his path. I built the whole tender trap of you, and he walked into it. And it gave me the leash I needed. You were never his love. You were my instrument, and it was meant to break her. Malus felt the cruelty of it reach for the oldest wound she had, the unwanted girl, the instrument, the no one. She felt it try to make her small. It did not work. Because she had felt, through a band of silver on a frozen moor, exactly how much she was loved, and no lie in a cold woman's mouth could unmake a truth she had touched with her own hand. You are wrong about only one thing, Malus said, and she let her cloak fall from her shoulders, and she opened her two hands, and she stopped holding anything back at all. You did not build me. You only found a fire, and mistook it for a candle. The warmth came up out of her the way it had on the moor, but this was not the moor. This was 3 moons of grief, and 1 stolen summer, and a child under her heart, and a good man dying by inches for love of her, and it came up as no candle and no hearth, but as the whole roaring gold heart of a forge. And the killing cold of that dead hall broke before it like ice on a spring river. Frost sheeted off the stones and ran as water. The pale guards cried out and fell back. And Lady Sereth's moon-silver chain and the thin silver oath still circling the throat of the king as he came through the great doors, that instant with Osmond and 2 wolves at his back, and every cold silver thing that House Riven had ever forged, all of it, all at once, blazed white and screamed with a sound like the world cracking. An oath is a binding, Malus said, and her voice rang now with harmonics that were older than she was, the voice of the last warden of a line that had kept the hearth of the world when the moon was young. And a binding is a cold thing. And I am the fire that was made before the cold. She turned her burning gaze on the king, on the cruel silver at his throat, and she wanted, with everything she was, everything she had, for that cold chain to break. It broke. The silver at the king's throat shattered like struck ice and fell away in dead gray flakes, and Malus heard Rovan drag in the first free breath he had taken in 3 moons, heard the roar that came out of him after it, the roar of an alpha king unchained at last. But the warmth was not done. It ran back up the length of the oath the way fire runs up a fuse, back to the mouth that had spoken it, back to Lady Sereth, and the speaker's own moon-silver chain, the seat of all her stolen power, went white-hot around her throat, and her oath, denied its victim, turned home upon its maker as every broken binding must. Sereth screamed. Wrath lunged from behind the throne with a silver blade for Malus, or for the child, and Malus turned to put her own body between that blade and the 3 small shapes she could see now at the far doors. Pell with his arms flung wide before Evo and Bryn, being a grown wolf at last in the only way that mattered, and she knew she would not be fast enough. She did not have to be. The King of Mist fell, free, crossed the hall in a black blur, and took his enemy out of the air, and the silver blade rang harmless on the stone, and it was over between one breath and the next. When Malus let the fire go out of her at last, the hall was warm for the first time in a season, and the cold house of Riven lay broken on its own melting frost, and the man she loved was turning to her through the golden dark, with his throat bare and free and his mouth at last, his own. He did not go to his throne. He came to her. Before the whole assembled pack of Mistfell, before the lords in their furs, and the freed and weeping survivors crowding in from the granary hall, and every wolf who had knelt 3 moons to a stolen crown, the Alpha King crossed the warming hall and took the hands of a scullery Omega in a fallen grey cloak. And he said the words the oath had strangled in his throat since the autumn, and there was nothing on his neck now but the warmth of her. "Hear me," he said, and his freed voice filled the hall to its ancient rafters. "I take no oath before this one. I take no Luna, but her. This is Malus, Hearthborn, last warden of the old fire, who mothered the least of my people when the rest of us had forgotten how, who carried my child through a winter meant to kill her, who walked alone into this hall tonight to buy back 3 orphaned children with her own life. She is my mate, she was my mate before I was ever your king, and she is your Luna, now and while I breathe, and any wolf who says otherwise may say it to my teeth. No wolf said otherwise." What rose from the pack of Mistfell instead was a howl, 1 voice and then 100, the sound of a people whose true heart has come home to them, and it went up through the warming hold, and out over the mountains, and far and wide across that stricken land, in the villages where the hearths had guttered and the old had died of the wrong cold. The killing winter broke, the frost drew back from the window ledges, the banked fires caught and held and burned clean and gold. Somewhere, a child who had been cold for a season felt the warmth come back into the room and slept. House Riven fell that night and did not rise again. Lady Sereth, unmade by her own returning oath, was stripped of the silver and the voice she had traded her soul for, and lived out what was left of her in the cold northern wastes she had once threatened others with. Cressa, who had been as much her mother's instrument as Malus was ever meant to be, was sent away to a distant holdfast and never troubled Mistfell again. Wroth did not survive his king's justice. And the alliance that Sereth had used the children to force was found once a true king sat his throne again, to have never been needed at all, for the wolves of Drossmark, hearing that Mistfell had thrown off its winter and stood whole and warm and unafraid, thought better of the border and drew back into their own cold country. And on a night in the first true spring, that land had seen in a year, in a hold gone warm to its very stones, Malus was brought to bed of a strong and squalling child, a son, dark of hair like his father, and when the midwife set him to the breast, warm in the hands the way his mother was warm, so that the whole birthing room glowed, soft and gold around him. But it was not only a son that came home to the royal ward that spring. For when Malus was churched and well, and the child was thriving, she went up the north stair one last time, the stair she had climbed in secret with stolen milk in the dead of a killing winter, and she opened the door of the cold high room, where the pack had once kept its grief. Only it was not cold now, and it was not high and forgotten now, for the king had ordered it, made the warmest room in the hold. And 3 children looked up at her from a great, soft bed by a great gold fire. Pell, who was learning slowly to let his shoulders down from around his ears, and Ivo, who no longer watched food as though it might vanish, and Bryn, who climbed down and crossed the floor and took Malus's hand in both of hers and looked up at her with those enormous solemn eyes. "Mama," said Bryn. It was the first word the child had spoken since the night she was carried through the gates. And Malus, Luna of Mistfell, last warden of the hearth, mother, now of 1 son, and 3 orphans and a whole warm mended pack, went down on her knees on the floor of that no longer cold room, and gathered the little one into her arms, and the king her mate came and knelt beside them, and they stayed there a long time in the gold firelight, all of them warm. There was no more stolen milk after that. There was only a nursery full of light, and a queen who had climbed a cold stair for children who were not hers until they were, and a king who had come to that stair too, and stayed. They had been cold a long time, all of them. They were not cold anymore. Thank you for spending this time in the warmth of their story. If it moved you, stay a while with the channel, where there is always another fire lit and another tale waiting in the dark.